Hello, my name is Janne Kauhanen. I'm the host and sauna majori of Cybersecurity Sauna. Today's episode was recorded live on site at our Cybersecurity Sauna booth at the Sphere 22 security event in Helsinki. We had an opportunity to talk to some of the guests and speakers at the event. I'm joined here by Matthew Rosenquist, who's a cybersecurity strategist talking about emerging risks and opportunities. The security industry's age-old question, how do we balance between usability and restrictions? What's your silver bullet for this?
Well, there is no silver bullet, right? Every organization has a different set of goals and expectations, and that target itself is moving as well. It's moving at the speed that an organization is growing and expanding and changing. So cybersecurity leadership has to be very much in tune with what those goals are and how they can contribute. It's not about ever providing perfect protection. It's about finding the optimal level.
Right.
And that's always a trade-off between the risks, the costs, and the friction that you incur upon the users, the operators, operations. You have to find that optimal balance.
So I guess the question then is, how do you do that? Like, I feel that we're pretty good as an industry and as businesses, like a lot of businesses are very good at sort of judging business risk, but cyber risk for some reason is incomprehensible and impossible to do anything about.
It's near impossible, but yes, for all intents and purposes, because the attackers are intelligent, right? And in many cases, they're very well resourced, probably more resourced and capable than any individual company or target. So the ambiguity level there and the adaptability of the attackers is incredibly high. They have the advantage. They get to decide when, who, and how to attack.
Right.
In combat terms, they maintain the initiative. That's what we talk about it. And so we tend to respond. We're coming in after the effect, and we have to then adapt to them. And that makes it very, very difficult because by their nature, they want to be unpredictable. They're trying to be unpredictable because it gives them an advantage. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't predict them, right? I do predictions 1, 3, 5, 7 years out. And a lot of it starts actually with understanding the attacker. What are their motivations? What are their objectives? What resources do they have? Or, what level are they willing to break the law? And these different archetypes each have a different combination of that. And when you start to understand that, you can start painting a picture on who they're going to target.
Yeah.
And then the methods that they're going to use. And that really actually helps with predictions. Now, most organizations don't go to that extent.
No.
Most organizations are head down, focused, just what's going on in their space.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when we talk about the maturity of organizations, that early maturity phase is, I just want to find the vulnerabilities and close them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And often that is with a leader or a CISO that is very technically oriented. Typically, they came up through the ranks as an engineer, and it is the way an engineer thinks. There is a vulnerability or series of vulnerabilities. I'm going to go and close those.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that easily.
Yeah.
Because it isn't simply an obstacle, it's an opposition.
Maybe this is the problem a lot of organizations have with the risk calculus, is that they're not sure who the enemy is and what to prepare for. Any advice on that front?
Well, Frederick the Great said, if you try and protect everything, you protect nothing.
Right.
And if all you're looking at is I'm going to close vulnerabilities and I'm going to manage risks that way, you're just trying to fix everything and it won't happen. One, you'll never catch up and there are an endless flow of vulnerabilities and you'll be flooded.
Absolutely.
And we've seen this in the industry. This is not news. We have to be able to allocate our resources and weight them towards the most likely attacks. And in that way, we maximize our force. We also have to look at it as a continuous process. So, for example, we have to be able to predict, which helps our prevention, right? Optimize our prevention. But we know things are going to get through. So we have to have detection mechanisms for things that get through. And then right after that, we have to have really strong capabilities to be able to remediate, right? Or resolve those issues in some way, shape, or form. And the learnings continue to flow back around and it feeds that process. You get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And as long as you stay in tune with your environment and your customers and the threats and everything else, it actually becomes much more manageable. It moves from an area of being impossible to something that we could manage that. It may take help. It may take help from security vendors or security experts or whatnot. But we could get there.
Okay.
So
that's hopeful. I'm talking to a lot of CISOs who feel that have a very good understanding of sort of maybe even the risks and the threats and the adversaries they're facing, but they're having a hard time communicating that information to the various stakeholders in the organizations. Is there any advice you'd like to offer on that front?
Yes. So the role of the CISO has never remained stagnant. It has always expanded. And even though you're really good at understanding the technologies and the risks and so forth, it doesn't necessarily mean you know the business savvy or the communication or the lexicon for communicating it up to the C-suite or communicating it up to the boards. And now CISOs are being asked, right? Report to the C-suite, report out to the boards. And if we go the other direction, the CISO and the entire security team, they actually don't do all the security. It's the employees and the vendors and so forth, people making good decisions, people reporting when something happens.
Absolutely.
Right? That's very, very important. So you have to also start to communicate outwards and down through the organization. And I've always said having a security savvy workforce is better than having a stack of technology.
100% sure. That makes sense. But that requires that sort of leap where you have to take the security from like, well, it's the security team's job and make it sort of useful and practical and a part of everybody's life. So how do you do that?
You have to make it relevant.
Yeah.
And for every audience, it's different. So for example, if you go to the finance organization and you ask the head of finance, what are you worried about, right? We've got all these cyber attacks. Chances are, they're going to say, I'm worried about an attacker coming in and undermining the integrity of my spreadsheets. Somebody's going to move a decimal point, and that's really bad. I'm finance. No, I don't want anybody moving my decimal points.
Yeah.
You go to HR and you ask the same question. They're like, well, I have to have confidential information, so I don't want the confidentiality of my data to be breached. Yeah. Make sure, well, would you be okay if systems were down for a day? Yes, I'd rather have systems down for a day or a week compared to the exposure of this data. So confidentiality,
over
not integrity, confidentiality is most important. You go to IT and it's all about uptime, availability.
Yeah.
That's all I care about. Keep it up, 5 nines. Right, or 4 nines, depending on where you're at. Okay, 4 nines is pretty reasonable. 5 nines is great. They're not as worried about those others. So when you're communicating with organizations, you need their buy-in. You need their support. You're going to be asking for time training their employees. You're going to be asking potentially for financial resources for products to help them. But the conversation has to be about what their concerns are. And if you can address those and speak in a language, right? You can speak about confidentiality and data breaches to that HR that resonates. Yes, I'm willing to set aside an hour or 2 hours a year for my employees to get all that training. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to help me with my confidentiality issue? Yes.
Yeah.
Where the conversation you have with a finance person completely different. You're talking about integrity. Yeah. So you have to tailor that knowing your audience. One message doesn't play equally.
Right.
You have to be savvy on that.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, a lot of the people I talk to they have problems making predictions, but that's your bread and butter. So I'm going to ask you to peer into your crystal ball and then talk about the next big thing that's coming that companies should start spending money on or are going to have to spend money on.
The list is long. And again, there's not one single answer. Depending on, and if you go back to those threats, right? Those threats have certain objectives. And based on those objectives, if they're, for example, cyber criminals interested in money, they're going to go where the money is.
Sure.
We have to understand which of the threats are rising more and faster and which have greater capability. That will then impact the threat landscape.
Absolutely.
Because that's going to determine where the targeted organizations are going to be. And if you fall within that scope, you got to be wary of that. If you don't fall within that scope, maybe you don't have to be as concerned.
Sure.
So we have to look at that. This year and next year and probably the year after, we're seeing a huge rise in cyber criminals. And again, they've always been rising.
Sure.
But with the benefits, the financial benefits that they're receiving from ransomware, it's an entire game changer for them.
Yeah, there's so much money now.
Yeah, they're not defrauding, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. It's tens of millions or hundreds of millions for very little work.
Yeah.
So they are receiving billions and billions and billions and very soon trillions of dollars. They're going to keep doing that. Why?
Yeah.
Greed principle, right? If I can steal $5 from you today, I'm going to steal $10 from you tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And so they're very predictable in that way. Cyber criminals right now are earning so much from ransomware and those types of attacks. They're attracting more criminals who see the benefits. So the problem just gets bigger and bigger. The other one that we're seeing that is rising is the nation state attacks. Now, nation states have been investing billions of dollars for many years on offensive capabilities. But when you now couple that with the willingness to use those weapons, and we're seeing that with the Russia's war on Ukraine, so on and so forth, they're willing to use them, it becomes a problem for everybody. And let me reemphasize that. You have billions of dollars that are being spent on either generating or acquiring vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities, and testing to be able to use that, but it's being withheld. The moment they release that, the moment they unleash that onto the world, maybe on Ukraine or some specific target, it doesn't matter. What happens is it's in the wild, and everybody grabs it, including, let's just say, for example, those organized cyber criminals.
Right.
They will then tear it apart. And instead of having to invest the billions of dollars on research, they will grab pieces of it included in their cyber criminal attacks and exploit it.
Yeah.
So they are leveraging the billions of dollars worth of research and development from nation states and using it for their little attacks.
Absolutely.
And so it impacts us all, not just the intended target from the nation state. It affects everybody. And we have to deal with that. And we're seeing a lot of technology being unleashed by certain nations that will have repercussions down the road for decades.
So how do we as defenders deal with that? Like, we're faced with unscrupulous cyber criminals that have no morals but have the tools and equipment of a nation state attacker. How do you defend against that?
We know they have the advantage. Right? The best we can do is work together. Right? We have to work with each other. And that includes the security vendors and suppliers, the experts, the other victims out there, people in your industry and across other industries. If we don't even communicate and work together, there's no way we can even maintain parity, move ahead.
Right.
Parity would be a great goal.
Sure.
Right. And even that is so tough given the advantages the attackers can do. But our first and best step is the communication and collaboration. The bad guys already do it.
Sure.
We need to do it as well. That gives us a chance to at least maintain parity.
That was such a perfect wrap up, because that is exactly what we mean with secure by the word co-security that we're using all over the place. So thank you very much for being with us today in Cyber Sauna and talking to us about this topic.
My pleasure.
Thank you. That was our show today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in.